Today's stuff we're going to be learning is Nazir, Daf Nun Aleph. This week's learning is sponsored by Sarah Averick and Jose Rosenfeld in memory of Ildiko Rosenfeld, Svia Rachel Bat Mordechai Halevi Miriam. She embodied elegance, grace, and wisdom. Today's stuff is sponsored by Caroline Ben Ali on the 6-year side of her mother, Daphne Rhodes, Dachna Dvora Bat Avraham Bechana. Mom was a loving, vivacious woman with a great sense of humor and was determined to be a better mother to her children than her own mother had been to her. Later in life, when she and Dad retired to Netanya, she indulged her love of singing and dramatics in the Netanya ACI musical theater group, Uri Uri Dvora, Uri Uri Davri Shiur. Today's stuff is sponsored by Risit Sohar in loving memory of her mother, Florence Rich Zichrona Livracha. Okay, nice dedication, but we are entering into I would say a bit of a horror story today. This is more like one of those movies with all sorts of dead bodies. And so I will kind of warn you to be prepared for today's daf. Our topic today entirely is Rakav. Okay, only for the very last 2 lines are we going to kind of steer off onto something else, kind of expanding from what we were dealing with. Rakav, if you remember, is this dust that's collected from a decayed dead body. And we learned yesterday, and we learned it before also, but a malot tarvad rakav, a ladle full of this dust from a decayed dead body is impure. Okay, so carries impurity. Now we're going to get started on all sorts of limitations on this law. Okay, I just want to point out something very important. If the law is limited, okay, so the law is limited. It doesn't mean we have to do things in this way in order to create the impurity of Rakav. Make sure you understand that. This is how to make Rakav. No, what we're trying to say is you won't have Rakav unless these circumstances exist. Okay, we're going to get so off track, meaning it's going to be so difficult to come up with a case where there really is Rakav that we're even going to ask later. Someone's going to finally ask the question, I don't get what's going on here. You're never going to have Rakav. Okay, and there'll be an interesting creative answer to that. But remember that you don't need to have Rakav. It just happens to be if there happens to be dust from the dead body, which right now we just thought, okay, decayed dead body that kind of fell apart and is in a dust type of composition, it will be impure. But today we're going to see that it's not so simple. We're going to start with the braita, and then we're going to have several statements of amoraim, also limiting it. So first the braita limits, again, time-wise, braita comes time of the Mishna. Then we're going to have all sorts of other amoraim that are limiting it. Once in a while, we'll also add in another Tanaitic source. So let's start with the top of our daf. Tanu Rabbanan, quote from a braita. Ezehu met sheyesh lo rakav. What is a case of a dead body that has Rakav? That again, this Rakav will be the case. Met shenikbar arom, has to be buried naked. Okay, already we know we bury in tachrichim, right? We do put something on the body, so it would have to be naked. Ba'aron shel shayish, in a marble coffin, o al gabe ritzpa shel avanim, or on a floor of stone. You see where this is going. What's the issue? We don't want it to decompose with anything mixed in. Again, not that we don't want it to, but if it has, we want, Rakav is only the dead body. If it starts to have, it's buried in the ground and there's dirt mixed in with it, right, or ground, soil, if there's, okay, we're going to see right now, in a minute, what else it could be. So this, there is Rakav, but nikbar b'chsutov, it's with its clothing, and then the clothing starts to disintegrate. Or ba'aron shel eitz, or if it's in a coffin of wood, which the wood might start to disintegrate, or on a floor with bricks. Okay, all of this stuff could get, some of it could decompose and get mixed in with the dead body, and then it won't be Rakav. Basically, it's not Rakav unless it's only from the dead body. That's number one. So the second set of cases was all cases where we don't say there's a law of Rakav because it's mixed up with something else. Amar Ula. Ula now comes and says, Ein Rakav ela haba min habasar umin hagidim umin ha'atzamot. Has to be that the body has flesh, sinews, and bones. If it's missing any of those parts, it's not Rakav. It has to be not only not mixed with anything else, but it has to incorporate all those elements. So now, Rava brings a question on Ula from a Tanaitic source. Rakav haba min habasar tahol. If it comes from just flesh, then it's pure. Now comes Rava and he says, what can you infer from that? If it comes from just flesh, it's impure. What if it comes from just bones? It sounds like if it comes from just flesh, it's a problem. Again, problem meaning it's not Rakav. But it sounds like if it comes just from bones, it would be impure. So, right? So, from here you can infer. Again, it's just an inference. And in a second, we'll say you don't have to infer that. But right now, it sounds like it's saying if it comes just from the flesh, it's pure, which would infer if it comes just from bones, it would be impure, which goes against what Ula said, because he said it has to have all three. So what do they answer, right? But and then they say, even though there's no flesh on it. Well, it says, no, you can read it like this. If it comes only from the flesh, it's pure. Meaning, just from the flesh, it's a problem from the flesh alone. If it's flesh mixed with bones, though, then it would be impure. Okay, and then you don't infer what you tried to infer to contradict me, you infer something else. But they ask a further question, but then you're saying basar alone, but as long as it has bones with it, it's fine. But what about the sinews? Haleka gidim, which he says, and this goes back to something we said yesterday, you can't have flesh and bones without the sinews. Remember, you could if it was in utero. Remember that the sinews weren't there yet connecting everything. But here we're talking obviously about a dead body later, not that unique case. And therefore, there's no way, once it has flesh and bones, it obviously has sinews and all that. Okay, so that was, again, we started with the braita. We limited Rakav to naked body in a space with either stones or marble, where none of the particles are going to start disintegrating. And we learned that it has to have, though, bones, sinews, and flesh. Rav Shmuel bar Abba Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Now we're going to quote Rabbi Yochanan on this. Another issue. Shnei metim shekbaran ze im ze nasu galgalin ze laze. This word galgalim is unclear. It's etymology what this means, but let's assume it means legalgal is when you put two things together, you roll them together. This is a mixture of two bodies. If you have two bodies buried together, it's also not Rakav. It has to be one person's body. If it starts to mix with another person's body, if they decompose together, these two bodies, that's not Rakav. Mati Rav Nata. So now he brings a question on this from a Tanaitic source. Rakav haba mishnei metim tameh. It says explicitly against this. Rakav that comes from two dead bodies is impure. This is a good test in reading skills, okay? So there's two people buried together is a problem, but Rakav that comes from two bodies is impure. That actually could be two different things. How so? Amarava, hatam shekavru ze b'fnei atzmo, v'ze b'fnei atzmo, v'hirkivu v'amdu avalo tavar Rakav. That braita that says you can have Rakav from two dead bodies, what it means is this body was buried there, this body was buried there. Each one decomposed on its own, and as if they decompose and they're together, it's a problem. Rakav that's a mixture of both is a problem. But if I have decomposed Rakav from this body and decomposed Rakav from that body, and let's say I don't have the ladleful, right? So again, only a ladleful is going to make it impure. Let's say the decomposed from this one and the decomposed from that one mixed together, then already it would be tameh. You can measure them up together, add them up to equal a malot tarvad, and they would make someone impure. Again, remember, this isn't that I want to do this. This is if it happened to happen and they mixed up together. The issue is that they can't be together to create Rakav. Once the Rakav is created, we have decomposed, decayed, dust from a body, and it mixes with another by accident. Somebody put them together somehow, and then someone came in contact with them, then that would make them impure. Okay, so those are two different things. And therefore not a question on what Rabbi Yochanan said. Amar Rabba bar Barchan Amar Rabbi Yochanan, another question. Okay, we're just going to keep on going today on things that are not going to be considered Rakav, or possibly we're going to have a slew of questions, not possibly, but as the sugi is going to go on, we're also going to have a slew of questions that remain unanswered about would this mess up our Rakav or not? Would this mean that this wouldn't create Rakav? Amar Rava bar, by the way, I didn't say this, but the root Rakav in Hebrew, laharkiv, is to rot. Okay, the root resh kuf bet is rotting. So that's what it means. It's rotted, it's rotten, rot from the decayed dead body. Right? Rakav is not always in terms of dead bodies. In this case, it's using dead bodies. Amar Rava bar Barchan Amar Rabbi Yochanan. So again, Rabbi Yochanan is quoted this time by somebody else. Gazaz sa'aro ukvaro imo. They cut your hair and they bury your hair with you. Naselo galgalim. We're going to keep seeing this word galgalim. Again, I told you there's a bit of a debate what what the etymology is, but everyone agrees that it means it basically prevents the Rakav from being created, because now you have hair, even though it was on the body before, now that you removed it, it's separate from the body. And therefore, it becomes a problem. And if there's Rakav, again, it will not be considered Rakav that's going to create impurity. Snan hatam. Now we quote a Mishna in Ohalot. Kol shebemet tameh chutz min hashinayim v'ase'al v'atziporim u'b'shat chiburan kulam tmeim. Anything on a dead body is impure, okay, except for teeth, hair, and nails, which b'shat chiburan, when they're attached to the dead body, they're tmeim, they're impure. But if you remove them from the dead body, they're not impure. This supports what we just said a minute ago, which is since they're separate, right? It's not considered part of the body, and it would mess up the Rakav from being created. But by Hizkiah now asks the question on this. If you're about to shave the hair off, or you're about to cut the nails off, what's their status right now? You haven't cut them off, but they're about to be cut off. So you already consider them not part of the body. Are they considered part of the body or not? Will they forget the Rakav? We're not talking about that. We're talking about is it impure right now because it's attached to the body based on that Mishna? Do we say, since I'm about to cut it, it's as if it was already cut. Right? This is all a matter of how much intention plays a role. I've seen this many times, right? My intent is to cut it. Does that mean it's as if it was already cut? Right? We've seen intention in all different kinds of ways. This is a different kind of use of it. Or do we say, they're already attached? Right now they're attached. Doesn't matter what you're intending to do. At this present moment, they're attached. Next, so now they say, why don't we learn it from here? How so? Now we understand why they brought the Mishnah. Because they brought the Mishnah, then Chizkiah asked a question on that Mishnah about Tumah in general, not about Rakav. But now they want to learn the answer from what Rabbi Bar said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Ta'aman, notice his words. Again, careful reading. Gazaz sa'aro ukvaro imo naselo gagalim. If you cut the hair, then it messes up the Rakav. Ha lo gazaz lo. It sounds like, what's the turning point? When you cut it. Not before that, not when you're planning to cut it, which obviously happens before you actually cut it. So they say, here you have it. If you didn't cut it, though, then it's not considered as if it's cut. And that would give us our answer. To which they say, no, that's not true. Hachi kamar. This is what they meant to say. This is how to read it, basically. Gazaz hareza galgalim. Lo gazaz mibaile. Gazaz, that's galgalim. What if lo gazaz yet? What if you didn't cut it yet and you were planning to cut it? Then he's not sure what the law would be. In other words, he only told you what he knew about. We have a lot of attempts to infer things, okay? Here we have where we basically say, you can't infer this, okay? We had it before also. Try to infer this. Oh, no, we can infer that. So here we're just saying, the fact that he said this doesn't mean what he thinks about the other case. Maybe he's not sure about the other case, and maybe he has the exact same question as Chizkiah. So let's move on from there. Now we get to Rabbi Yirmiyah. You might remember Rabbi Yirmiyah. And Rabbi Yirmiyah likes to ask nudnicky questions, okay? This whole daf is a little bit of nudnicky questions and getting into minute details of things. So Rabbi Yirmiyah is going to have a bunch of questions. The first one, I'll already tell you that many of the commentaries struggle with the question, with the answer. What exactly is the question? How does the answer it? There's a lot of, I would say, difficulties with this text. Okay, we've talked about this many times. In Nazir, there seemed to be a lot of not well edited, right? That this Masechet wasn't well edited. And because of that, sometimes there's things that don't make so much sense. So if you don't fully understand it, it's okay. We're going to explain it with one commentary. But again, I'll raise some of the questions and the problems with this explanation. By Rabbi Yirmiyah. So his first question is the following. Rakav haba min ha'akev mahu. If it comes from the heel, what's the halachot? Heel, why is heel different? So some people explain the heel is different than the rest of the body. First of all, we often have dead skin on our feet. The nerves don't get there. You don't have sensation as strong as you have in other parts of the body. So it's somewhat dead even in lifetime. Okay, that's the idea here, the concept. Again, it's not exactly dead, but a little bit. So maybe Rakav that comes from the Akev, so they say this like this, Ki gamrinan Rakav. And by the way, gamrinan usually means we have a tradition about Rakav, meaning this is probably a halacha l'Moshe Misina. This whole law of Rakav is halacha l'Moshe Misina. And when we learned it, do we learn Hacha bekule mate? Aval da'ata min Akev lo? Does it come from the entire body? But if it comes from the heel, no. Odil maloshna, or maybe it doesn't make a difference. It's not exactly clear what they're talking about. Do they mean if Rakav from the Akev is mixed in, is that a problem? Right? It's a little bit weird. Again, it's very hard to understand exactly what the question is. Is it just Rakav from the heel? Are we talking about, would that be Rakav? Which actually seems to go against other sugyot later where we see Rakav is only going to be if the body's whole. So maybe it's asking if Rakav is galgalim, basically, because you have some stuff mixed in that was already dead in lifetime, maybe that can't be considered Rakav. Then you're going to have a problem with any kind of dead body because any dead body has heel, right? So it's a bit of a problem. Anyway, the Gemara is going to kind of ask that, but ask in a bit of a different way. Okay, let's leave it right now. There's actually a footnote in the Koran which describes in reality that people do view the heel a bit differently than medically than the rest of the body. You can read it if you have the Koran. It's an interesting footnote about the reality here. But again, there's many different interpretations of what exactly is going on here. It's not clear cut at all. So again, let's read it. Higamrinan Rakav, when we learn Rakav, it's the rest of the body. But maybe not what comes from the Akev. Or maybe it doesn't make a difference. So now they say, Tashma, let's learn from here. Titane Rabbanit bar Shaya, Rabbi Yoshaya, which we read before, he brought this braita. Rakav ba mishnei metim tameh. Now, if we ask the question the way I did, the question of the Gemara was the way I said it, really, we would have had a better question. It doesn't have to do from the Rakav ba mishnei metim. It would just be Rakav of anybody would never be Rakav because it's mixed with the heel. But that's basically what they seem to be asking. Because Isa kadata habamina akev lo. If you have two dead bodies and you have Rakav from one and Rakav from the other, and they mix together, we can say this is a Shiur, right? This works. This is Rakav. It carries impurity, but maybe there's an Acha from that one mixed in there, and maybe there's an Acha from that one mixed in there. So again, it's really even on an individual level, but they prove it from here as well, right? That this can't possibly be. So therefore, they reinterpret the question and they say the following. If the entire body rots and also the Akev, obviously that doesn't mess it up because again, then we never have Rakav by a body really, unless they didn't have a heel. But again, we're going to see later that if you don't have a complete body, then it also isn't Rakav. So you really wouldn't end up with a case. If the Akev, well, you have a body. Now, what happens is, and here's the theory, since the heel is somewhat already has, let's say, some dead skin, it's already farther from the nerves and all that, it's going to rot first. Now, the heel rotting first is not going to be considered Rakav, or Rakav, sorry. It's not going to be considered Rakav. Why not? Because it's a heel, and the heel is already different and considered somewhat dead in lifetime. But if the foot, let's say, which is right next to the heel, starts to rot, and the rest of the body doesn't, do we consider that Rakav? Or do we say, since the body hasn't fully decomposed yet, it's only on account of the heel, because it's close to the heel, that's what's making it rot, and it's not really rot from a dead body. Again, how to understand this exactly is very difficult. And like I said, not just are we confused by it, but the commentaries were confused by this as well. In any case, the answer is teku. We don't know the answer. Next question for Rav Yirmiyah. It would be good to do a study and see how many of Rav Yirmiyah's questions of the Gemara actually get answered and how many are left with teku. By Rav Yirmiyah, ubar b'me'ei isha havegalgalim olo. Pregnant woman dies with a fetus in her womb. So is that Rakav or not? Is that galgalim? Do we say now she's got a mixture of two things, her and the baby? Is it two bodies? Kevan de amar mar ubar yerachimo. Now this comes up in many sugyot where we say the ubar is like the thigh of the mother, meaning it's part of the mother's body while it's inside. So, and that has all sorts of halachic ramifications. We'll get to them in different places. But if you say ubar is yerachimo, and since we say that, you would say hilkach gufahu v'lo have galgalim. Well, then it sounds like it's part of her body and it's not galgalim. Or odilma, or maybe we say kevan de sopo. Let's say, since eventually, though, it's true right now it's yerachimo, but no, in this case it's not going to come out. But it should have come out at some point. So, let's say, since it was eventually supposed to leave, maybe it's considered as if it's separate. So that's the question. Doesn't get answered. Ve'imtim tzelomar. And if you want to say ubar, let's say mifresh parish mine, since the ubar eventually will come out, if you want to say it's already considered a separate entity, in which case a pregnant woman would not have a law of Rakav, her body decomposes. Well, turning now to Amud Bet, shichvat zera b'me'ei shamahu. And here, again, the language is going to get a little bit tricky, and where they're going with this gets a little tricky, not what you would expect, but we'll start and we'll see where it goes a little wrong here. But if she has semen in her body, which is supposed to create a new body, right? So what does it mean she has semen in her body? It means within 72 hours. 72 hours, semen is considered still live according to Acha, also ramifications of that. Anyway, shichvat zera b'me'ei shamahu. Since it didn't create anything yet, meaning it should have created, but it didn't yet. That's the idea. The Shechvat Zera could have created a body. This is why this is coming. Well, I'll tell you what's confusing here. It seems to be coming from the ubar case, from the fetus. Since the semen could create new life, but in the end, it's going to be talked about as if there's some foreign substance in your body, okay, that wasn't part of your body. So it's looked at in two different ways here. It's a little bit confusing because you would have thought it would kind of just stick with one, but it doesn't. So they say the following. Do we say, since it didn't create anything, it's like it's part of her body, okay, as opposed to, right, now you would have said, the opposite would have been, you would have thought the sugya was going, since it could have created something that would have been considered separate from her body, because remember, we're in the intim telomar. If you want to go and say the ubar is separate from her body, then maybe the semen is considered separate from her body because it could have created potential for something that would have been separate from her body. But that's not what they say in the second part. So that's why it's a little confusing. But they say the following, and then it morphs into something else, which then leads us to our next question. So they say, again, let's go back to what the two options. Do we say, since in the end it didn't create anything, so it's just now part of her body? Or maybe because it came from somewhere else, wasn't from her body, it's considered like some foreign substance in her body. And now we're going to talk about foreign substances in the body. So by Rav Papa, based on this, Rav Papa now asks another question. And again, we're not getting answers to any of these questions. Pirshamahu, what about feces in the body? Right? You have it ready to come out of the body, it hasn't come out yet. Since she can't function without eating, and the feces is from her food, it's just part of her survival, and therefore it's part of her body. Right? Again, if you're going to say the semen maybe came from outside, but the food, it's true, it came from outside, but the feces that was created was because she needed food to eat. Maybe it's part of her body. Oh, Dilma, Hanami, Me'alma Ate, or do we say, no, this is a foreign substance inside her body, or it was something that was going to come out anyway, and not. So again, does it prevent the creation of Rakav or not? Again, not the creation of it, but the creation of an impure Rakav. Now we even go farther and say, what about a person's skin? Okay, what do we say about skin? To which, by Rav Huna bar Manoach, he adds another one, kicho b'neo ma'u. We saw kicho b'neo the other day, that's saliva and mucus. What about that? Okay, was that considered foreign or not? Amrle Rav Shmuel bar Acha, Rav Papa, you're probably happy we finally get to this question. Rav Shmuel bar Acha says to Rav Papa, v'isal kadatach kol hani de ka'amar havigalgalim, Rakav de mitame yecha mishkach ala. Right, you don't always get this question, which is the one you're always thinking of, right? Often we have questions on a sugya like, whoa, how did we get this far, right? And the Gemara doesn't really ask it. Here comes Rav Shmuel bar Acha, and he says to Rav Papa, if you're going to answer all these questions and say that all these things are not Rakav, well, how on earth are you ever going to have a case of Rakav that creates impurity? And you figure that's where it's going to end. But Rav Papa comes up with a creative answer. And here's where we get a little bit into the horror movie kind of theme, which is going to continue in the next line as well. The ashke made kalim, it's where they give him the person an enema before they die, so their whole system is cleaned out. Sach yanasha, they put on a depilatory cream which removes all the hair. Vishalko b'mei Tiberia, and then they boil up the body in the springs of Tiberia, where the water is very hot, obviously, and then it basically what happens when the water is hot, you can peel off the skin very easily. So then they peel off the skin of the body, quite unpleasant. Wait till we get to the next line. And in that, first of all, the commentaries ask another question here, which is, if you are going to take off the skin, you don't need to remove the hair first. So why do you remove the hair first? Good question. Okay, there are some answers given, but we'll leave it as a question. Usually the questions here are better than the answers. Anyway, he comes up with a scenario where Rakav can exist. Whether anyone would ever in their right mind do this is a really obvious question. Who would do that? Anyway, next. So this was the second, the first part of the daf was starting with the braita and then quoting all these amoraim, or some of them were also based in a braita here and there, but showing all these narrowing down of Rakav to only certain cases where it's a very pure substance just from the dead body, not from anything else. And then we move and even the hair and the teeth and all that, if it's mixed in with it once they were separated from the body, also won't be Rakav. Then we started with all these questions. What about the heel? Which again, what exactly the question was, a good question, not 100% clear. Then we had the fetus, from there the semen, from there the feces, and from there the skin, Did I miss one? I think that was everything. And then how could we ever get to this situation? And then they basically describe how they could get there. Rabbi. Now Rabbi wants you to understand how this Rakav works. It's not just dust from crushed up body. Okay, remember I told you Rakav means decayed. So he says the following, Naktina, and we know, or it was passed down to us, if someone took the dead body and ground it up into dust. And here's the other disgusting, Someone takes the body, grounds it up into dust. Ein lo Rakav, it doesn't have a law of Rakav, because that's not decayed. It's not the dust that we're concerned about, the crushed up particles. It's that it decayed. This didn't decay. This just got chopped up and ground into pieces. So they asked the following question. What if you ground it up and then it rotted after that? Is the issue here that you need basar gidim and atzamot, You need the flesh, the bones, and the sinews, and this has it. It's just crushed up into pieces and then it decayed. You need, bones, sinews, and flesh that decayed. And so what if it was ground up and decayed, or was it ground up and decayed? Or does it need to be in its pure form, meaning it needs to decay while it's in its pure form of a full body, and this doesn't have that, the lake. Teku. Again, we end with the teku. We don't know the answer. Ula Barchina brings a braita. Another ding than this I mentioned earlier, you have a body that's missing parts. Okay, God forbid something happens and the body was severed and we don't maybe have all the parts, we didn't bury them together. So it's missing parts. Ein lo Rakav, it doesn't have the laws of Rakav. Below tefusa, below shchunat kfarot. These are three laws that don't exist here. So tefusa is that when you bury the body, let's say something happened, it was in the middle of a war and you buried the body randomly in the middle of the road, okay? Somewhere, in a very out there place, not in a cemetery, and you want to move it, okay? There's certain places where we allow you to move a grave. One of them is if it's on the road. So we allow you to move it, but when you move it, you have to remove not only the body, also the dirt surrounding it, and 3 tvachim down, you have to take all that dirt with you and move it with the body. It's different places, reasons why. Maybe you want to get the tumah out of the ground, or it becomes kind of part of the body and you want to move it with the body. So that law of tefusa, that you have to take the earth around that's surrounding it, that's not true if the mate is missing body parts. And shchunat kfarot. You come across 3 bodies in a random place, then you have to assume that maybe there was a shchunat kfarot here, maybe this was an old ancient graveyard, and you have to start digging around to see if there's other graves. Again, this is in the world of Tum and Tara. We want to make sure that you don't become impure. We have to check the whole area. But not if the body is severed, okay? If it's not complete, then, okay, some of the commentaries explain, because possibly this was just some crazy incident that happened, and it's not an indicator that there's a cemetery here. So if even one of them doesn't have, then you no longer have 3 graves, and then you don't need to do this. So that's laws that are relevant for a dead body that's missing parts. So the main thing for our purposes was the fact that ein lo Rakav. Meitive. Now they bring a Mishna in Eduyot to contradict. The Mishna in Eduyot talks about, we already learned about Eber min hamet and Eber min hachai, right? We said that a limb that comes from, if you have a full limb from a live body, it also carries impurity. And likewise, a limb from a dead body carries impurity. Also a dead body, if you have a kezayed of just flesh, no bones, just the flesh, a kezayed of that from a dead body is mitame. So the Mishna Eduyot, chapter 6, Mishna 3, wants to know, what about flesh from a live body? If I cut an olive bulk of flesh from my body, okay, let's say it's not that a limb was taken off, but a big chunk of flesh comes off of my body, it's a kezayed. Would that carry impurity also? Just like an aver minachai would that also carry impurity? So there's a machloket there. Rabbi Yehoshua and Rabbi Nechemia say no, it does not carry impurity. And here's Rabbi Yeshua's explanation. He says, lo, ima martin, we're going to use this to question what Ula Barfinina said, brought this braita, meit shachaser ein lo rakav. Ima martin b'meit sheyesh lo rov v'rova v'o melo tarvad rakav. So now he says, you can't compare the flesh from a dead body to the flesh from a live body, because dead bodies have all sorts of stringencies that don't exist by, or laws that don't exist by live bodies. For example, they have rov, right? What's that? Rov binyan or rov minyan. If you have the majority of the bones or the majority of the limbs bones or the majority of the structure of the body, it's mitame. And Rova atzamot is a quarter kav of bones, will be matame, where you don't have that by aver minachan. And you have melo tarvad rakav. You have this law of rakav that you don't have by an aver minachan. Tomar b'chai, right now we're going to say, and in a live body, this is still the Mishna, she'en lo rov, v'lo rova, v'lo melo tarvad rakav. These laws do not apply there. Now, hechidami, what are we talking about? We're comparing these laws in Ever Min HaMeit to these laws in Ever Min HaChai, right? Which means what? If we're talking about Ever Min HaChai, we're not talking about Rakav from the whole body. We're talking about Rakav from a limb, right? Let's say the limb is cut off and then it disintegrates and decays, turns into dust. So the comparison to Ever Min HaMeit would be to Ever Min HaMeit, right? Just from a limb of a dead body, which sounds like there's Rakav in only one limb. That's what they're going to say right now. Hechidam. Right? Obviously, in the Ever Min HaChai, we're talking about there's no din of rakav for that limb that's severed from the body. So dikavatega bemet, when you compare that to since the Mishna there is doing a comparison, afilu chad ever rakav. Sounds like by a dead body, even one limb would create rakav, because we're assuming that we're comparing apples to apples and not apples to oranges. So we have rakav by one limb of a live person, right, that was severed from a live person, and rakav from a limb that was severed from a dead person. So if one limb, then obviously a body that's missing limbs should also create rakav. To which they say no. You misunderstood the comparison. Miktane hamet didn't say like this in a dead body. What it meant to say is, in dead bodies, there's rakav. In pieces from live bodies, there's not rakav. It's comparing pieces of a live body, right, a limb from a live body, to laws of dead bodies in general, which could mean the whole dead body and not necessarily one limb. So don't understand the comparison the way you thought, and therefore it's not a problem. Next question. By Rava, we have two more questions to our daf. By Rava, last question about Rakav on today's daf. The last question is going to be a little off topic. What if a limb from your body, now there's a big debate about what this is talking about. I'll explain it in one way, that we're talking about the limb was severed from the body when the person was still alive, let's say a few minutes before death. Okay, someone cuts off the limb of the body and it started to rot. Okay, then after it rot, let's say maybe not a few minutes before, but let's say a few days before, then chazar v'met, then the person died. And now we have this rot from the live limb that came from someone who's now dead. So, mahu ki gemire rakav de'irkav keshumed odil mahashemi ahamait. Do we say it's only rakav that comes from a dead body, or is it rakav that comes from someone who's dead? Okay, now some people think maybe it was attached to the body and it had rotted while it was attached to the body. It's hard to understand why it would rot then. Anyway, it's a little unclear what exactly they're asking about, but the concept is if he was alive when something rotted and then he died, maybe, or she died, would we consider that rakav? Okay, that's the question. So again, they try to learn it from the same Mishna in Eduyot. Tashma lo imamarta b'meit sheyesh lo rov v'rova u'melo tarvad rakav tomar b'chai v'chulei. Now here they're stressing on meit and chai, which sounds like rakav is a law for someone who's dead. no matter when it rotted, as long as the person's dead. Tama mishum chai, right? The reason why it doesn't work is because the person's alive. There's no rakav. Hamate yesh lo rakav, but if he eventually dies or she eventually dies, it will be considered rakav. To which the Gemara says no. Mikatane hamate. It doesn't say now they're dead. Hakamash malan dishum mate yesh lo rakav shum chai en lo rakav. No, it's telling that from a dead body there's rakav, from a live body there isn't rakav. You can't prove it from there at all. Last question for today. Actually, before we get to our last question, I want to just talk about one concept about this whole Rakav. Okay, let's review our daf because the next question is going to be off topic. So let's just review quickly. We saw Rakav is, so hopefully I'll remember all the issues, but number one, it has to be not buried with anything else, not buried with anyone else, not buried with parts that came off the body like hair and nails, and those things are considered external to the body, but in the body. But if they were taken out of the body like teeth and buried together with the body, and then it decomposed, that would not be Rakav. Then we had a question, what if you're about to remove it? What about that point? Then we had all these questions of the heel, the questions of the fetus, the questions of the semen, the questions of the feces. How do we view the skin? Okay, all those things, do they prevent Rakav? We didn't have answers to those. Then we said, if the body's ground up and right, that's not rotting, that's not Rakav. But what if it decayed, right? If it was ground and then decayed, we didn't have an answer to that question either. We said a body that's missing parts has to be a completely whole body. Otherwise, it's not Rakav. We tried to we questioned that from this Mishna in Eduyot, but we rejected it. And then we had, what if it rotted when he was still alive and then he died? Again, let's just assume we go with the interpretation that it was severed from his body, rotted, and then the person soon died after. So would we consider that Rakav? Okay, now, what is the idea behind this? So I had found an article on the Har Etzion site. They have something called the Daf Yomi. And there was an article there which talked about Rakav, and he was saying along the lines of the author, there was saying that this idea of Rakav is, you can view it, at least this is how I understood what he was saying, as representational of a dead body. That you could have dust from a dead body that's representative of the dead person. And that's only going to be if, number one, the dead person is complete, if there's nothing else mixed in, if there's no one else with it, right? This Rakav is kind of representational of the dead body. And it's only going to create impurity when it represents the dead body. And that's why it has to be a complete. It has to be without anything else. Because that's really what this Rakav is representing. It's the only reason why it creates impurity is because it's really representative of a dead body. Like dust doesn't really seem like anything. So only when it's representative of a dead body will we view it as Rakav. I thought that was an interesting concept. It's a way to understand all these details in the daf that seem hard to fathom or hard to understand exactly why, but that seemed to be an interesting explanation. Okay, with that, we're going to end with our very last question in today's daf, which is, since we were talking about the body being whole in order to have Rakav, now they talk about some other law, totally, entirely different, that has to do, maybe they just wanted to get off this topic already, that has to do with something being whole. So one of the important halachot of kashrut, and this is why we're very careful about bugs in Judaism, is if you have, normally everything's batal b'shishim, unless not, right? There's all sorts of exceptions. One of those exceptions is if you have a full creature, okay? The entire creature. So for example, they're going to ask about an ant. You need a full if you eat a full ant, even though it's less than a requisite amount, okay, forget about bitul b'shishim, right? Even that was just why we clean them, because if it's mixed in, but you eat it whole, it's going to be a problem anyway. But also if you eat it, it's not even a kazayit, right? Or any requisite amount to be liable for. But basically, if it's complete, it's forbidden for you to eat it. So Rava asked the following, Nimalasha chasra mahu. What if the ant is missing a leg? Now, an ant can function without a leg, still considered alive, but it's not complete. So going on this Rakav needing a complete, they say the following. Shiura gamrin alav hachasel. Does it need to have a shiur? In other words, when we say bria, it's a complete creature. Do we mean it has to be a complete creature? It can't be missing any parts. Just like to create Rakav of impurity, we need a complete creature, right? A complete body, maybe with an ant as well. Or we just need a creature that functions. This is a functioning creature just because it doesn't have a leg, it's still functioning as an ant. So maybe, right, this is a creature, and therefore it will be a problem. I'm going to leave you with this question. We'll have to wait till tomorrow to see the answer, and I hope you don't have nightmares from our daf. And these dafim are a little bit out there or a lot out there, but the good thing about Daf Yomi is I will just words of encouragement at the end of today's class, right? We're going to have a bunch of these dapim of Tuma and Tara, and it's not so easy. Number one, just remember that this is good because you'll never get to these dapim otherwise. You'll never learn them. And it's really, eventually, when you learn them over and over, the ideas get into your head and you start to learn better about Tuma and Tara, which is an important part of our religion, even if we don't necessarily practice it. That's number one. Number two, after Masechet Nazir, for a long time, we're going to have Sota, which is fascinating. First of all, a lot of drashot, and also just a very fascinating topic, especially as women. Then we're going to go to Gitin and Kiddushin, which are very relevant and super interesting Masechtot, and then all the Bavas. We have a long stretch of lots of interesting Gemaras. So if sometimes we're dealing with very out there esoteric topics, I will encourage you that at least Daf Yomi does have a quick pace. At certain times, we can appreciate the quick pace, and it gets us through material quickly, and we move on to other things after. And also the upcoming Masechtot are for a really long time. We have a good long stretch of very relevant, not at all esoteric topics. So with that, I will leave you with some positive thoughts for today. Have a great day, everyone.